But your slides are here. Sorry, I just checked. Is it here? Yes.
The P. Kelly one.
Okay. Yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Okay.
You're on camera. You keep smiling.
Sure. Okay. A text message comes in at 2:25 a.m. Come here now. It's very good. The user thinks for a moment. Already tucked away in the warm bed, made warmer by the electric blanket set to 6, he opens the camera app on his phone and takes a photo of the controller. He opens Instamoji, imports the image, and places a new moon with face image at the center of the circular display. He saves it to the camera roll, then returns to the message application and sends the image as a response. Happy birthday. Hope you're eating delicious things. XO. Thanks. Of course I am. Poultry leg, wine glass. In Instamoji, the user spends 4 minutes pasting every food and drink emoji on an image of the birthday boy, then sends the finished product through. Are you in the room right now? Is the response. The original image was posted on opening night without comment and received 3 likes. The second image contains additional overlays signifying the mustachioed artist, the emoji used by close friends for him, and an artist palette emoji. He created the image used on the poster for the exhibition. It remains in the camera roll, having not been published or messaged elsewhere. Yeah, I'm talking about emojis this afternoon, a little bit light. So yeah, we're getting closer to the drinking hour, I guess. So I'll keep it light and yeah. So the big question, this is the big question, I guess, that I'm asking this afternoon. It's I think a very important question. It's probably a question that a lot of people ask when they look at anything to do with emojis. And that question very, very, very clearly is, can this practice be considered art, or is it simply a kid gone wild with a stamp on a phone? So, from emoticons to emoji, how did we get here? If you're anything like me, you probably like them a lot. You find them very useful. You might have some frames on your messaging app on your phone, whatever type of device it is, that kind of look like this. And you might even, take it as far. I've sort of self-censored a bit there by cutting off some of them. But yeah, you might get very creative with them. Some of you might hate them, and I completely understand that as well. But it is a very much developed area of communication, form of communication now. There, of course, have been developments in the technology and the practice of emoji. It's been famously updated for racial inclusivity, and there are constant calls for updates. There are multiple versions on multiple platforms. Yeah, and there have been, calls like that one saying that we need, just in the same way that we have multiple shades of every human-based emoji for different people of different racial backgrounds, just in as much we need different types of pizza. These are all the different list of emoji across all the platforms. I think we saw some Google-based ones earlier today at varying points. There are, of course, a heap of different keyboards you can download from different types of cultural phenomena. These are a couple that I have used of late, including the Broad City one from the TV show Broad City. There's a RuPaul's Drag Race one in the middle. There's a food and wine one at the end there. What we have down here is an app called Emoji Face that you can take a photo of your own face and it will create a personalized emoji keyboard for you. A little bit scary though, I warn you. Last week, this keyboard came out. This is the version that has 3 emoji on each keystroke. They're down to 1 emoji per keystroke, but obviously you want more options. So in terms of, the emoji's place in our society, emoticons and emoji are well and truly established as forms of communication. That's what it says up the top there. Chalkley and others say the simplicity of emoticons and initialisms enables the sender to turn simple and literal messages into ones that produce complex and multifaceted meaning. And there's a subjectivity here when it comes to using emoji, I think. Stark and Crawford say these symbols do considerable work to underscore tone, introduce humor, and give individuals a quick and efficient way to bring some color and personality into otherwise monochrome networked spaces of text. Emoji can act as emotional coping, as an emotional coping strategy and a novel form of creative expression. It's even gotten as far that that there is an emoji movie in the works as well. They're not just used as a form of communication. It's actually, moving keyboards and beyond the keyboard into other areas of life, art, and creative expression. This week, you may have heard that the face with tears of joy was voted as the Oxford Word of the Year. Sorry to say for the emoji haters. And there's even this movie in the works. Recently, this book was published, Emoji Dick, edited and compiled by Fred Benenson, Call Me Ishmael. It's pretty great. And recently there was a couple of years ago, there was an art show in New York City. What was it called? An emoji art and design show. I think it was just called the Emoji Art and Design Show. And you can see various works there, including everyone's favorite emoji, the dancing flamenco lady. One of the works, Melroji Place, which is a video artwork, is a subtitled version of a short clip from the 90s show Melrose Place. I'll skip very briefly because I think you'll get the point.
Welcome back. Did you have fun with Big Apple? Good. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Mrs. Michael Mancini.
Yeah, you get the point there, I think. So that's by Cara Rose DeFabio. And I think that's a really funny, interesting kind of one. Sorry, I need a better note system. I need the iPad. But I'll get to the point here because today I'm talking about Instamoji and similar sort of apps that do allow you to insert emoji on top of photos. And many of you will have seen this. Maybe some of you have played around with it a bit. Essentially, it treats the emoji as stickers that you can insert over the top of photos. You may recognize some of these famous images here. I think the one in the middle is quite significant because these apps utilize this contemporary phenomenal language to remix, appropriate, and give new contexts to new or existing images very, very easily. The fact that users of emoji can download an image from existing databases and modify it to great effect within a different application in a very short amount of time is significant, especially given Matovich's contention here, saying that the ease in which media objects can travel between platforms is more important to remix practices than the hardware itself. So here are some examples. I'm going to go through them all in a bit more detail in a moment. But back to my original question, can this practice be considered art, or is it simply a kid with a stamp gone wild? First, let me say that I don't think that Instamoji is incredibly groundbreaking. Yes, I think there's potential for interesting creative practices to come of this, but at its core, it's simply a new form of collage, albeit with new iconography on the palette. It's quite playful as well. Schuttenberry say that visual juxtapositioning is becoming increasingly common as technologies for creating and publishing media have grown in sophistication. However, it has a long pedigree. And that they say that this pedigree, of course, includes Eisenstein's theory of montage, itself borrowing from notions of collage or glue developed by Picasso and George Braque, then used extensively by the Dadaists and Surrealists. So there is a great history to this sort of a practice, I think. I'm going through a few different ideas of what these sort of practices can actually achieve. They're listed very clearly at the top there. The first is to emphasize or punctuate. Yeah, so let's talk about what these emoji are actually adding. You'll, of course, see the one on the far left here is simply emphasizing that this is a photo of a boat, right? Or at least, you know, that's the explicit context that's being communicated through it. The other two I find a bit more interesting because there is more affection at play there. This is, after all, a very subjective way of playing around with an image, you know, like playing around with an image is subjective anyway, but that there is a lot of emotion sort of involved here as well. It's often, there's, I think, a reason why love hearts are probably one of the more common things that pop up in apps like Instamoji. Yeah, so a couple of quotes here. Emoji and emoticons have become critical elements in the affective mix of relationship maintenance, sustenance, and continuation. And I think this is not just in its use on Instagram and those sort of platforms, but also simply when it's used in an MMS. Yeah, but you know, also public profiles too. I would argue that practices such as Instamoji contribute to the creation of what Hawth points to as new forms of gendered labor, art, and new media that rethink the personal. Hawth also says that emoji is an extension of female-centered, emotionally charged vernacular. I think, you know, forming gendered art that rethinks the personal. It can be used for censorship, whether it's sort of serious censorship or there are people that take full frontal photos of themselves with their cameras. I don't know if you've heard, but some of them do take the extra step to put these photos on social media. Platforms like Instagram, you know, don't allow people's junk to just be put up on the feed. So people will put, you know, an emoji on top of, you know, an odd eggplant or peach here or there, for instance. But of course, you know, it is used in a very playful, joking kind of way. The image on the right here is of a musician that I know who's just released an album, and that, without the eggplants, is the album cover. It's attracted some minor controversy in Melbourne of late, and that's her reaction to the controversy on social media the other day. It can be used to reappropriate. Of course, the photo on the left here without the emoji is simply a photo of an arm against a wall, but it's sort of hijacking in a way that image to, you know, create a track for the cyclist. And finally, and I think this is to some degree a more interesting use of it, is to annotate or give explicit context to these images. So, whoops, I'll skip the other one there. Yeah, so if you look at some of those images, I'm mindful of time, but the one of the second one here, this guy just got a haircut, is pretty much what that's talking about. Using the haircut emoji combined with a selfie, yeah, it becomes pretty clear. But the meaning of emoji can be, you know, it can be unclear at times, sometimes. There are what Schuttenberry point to as personal contexts that are unclear without the presence of additional information. As an aside, I think it's also worth highlighting that there is often a lack of context for many artworks in general. So I think the stating of explicit contexts can be done through this sort of app. Although emoji use is heavily structured by linguistic and social contexts and by both cultural and personal conventions. Stark and Crawford say. Yeah. And finally, sorry, losing all my paper. Yeah, I think a notable thing to say here at this point, coming back to my original question, this great quote by Dieuze, it's the privilege of our times to use media to make art with life, he says. So, finally, on the note of whether works created on these apps can be deemed art, I'd highlight these works as examples of, or arguments as to why that could be the case. People using mobile and social techniques to create new contexts, to share visual creative expressions, says Marsha. The search for new forms of communication, far from being the preserve of painters and poets, is now part of a collective effort. In this way, the old specialization of art has finally come to an end. There are no more artists because everyone is an artist. The work of art of the future will be the construction of a passionate life. Yeah. So I think that's a very provocative statement, especially when framed with an app like Instamoji. I think there are some confronting sort of issues going on here. So now, the final discoveries at the finish. Instamoji, we can say that Instamoji and similar apps can be easily used to create everyday artworks. These artworks are often emotional, effective, and gendered. Playful, I would also add to that. And that these artworks remix original images to emphasize or punctuate, censor, reappropriate, or give or to give explicit context. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. Should we do questions now?
I don't mind.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Any? Yeah?
Hey,
What have you got?
Just one question. Will you call that the neo-pop art?
I was thinking about it, and the term like post remix came to mind because we've been talking about remix for a very long time, and I think it's almost getting to a point where it's kind of moving beyond Manovich's definitions of it, because I feel like when people look at emojis and this sort of use of it, it's like a bit of a mind blown away kind of moment of have we really come to this? A lot of people, I think, sort of ask, and I think that we are kind of moving beyond that a bit. So yeah, what was the phrase you used?
The new pop art.
The new pop art. Yeah. Neo pop art, maybe something like that. Yeah, post pop art.
Fantastic, very funny. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Paula? What's the lineage of some of this imagery? To me, looks quite familiar from like Japanese photo booths or sort of Asian kind of photo culture.
Yeah,
Were they early adopters? Are we way behind?
They're very much early adopters. If you actually look at the hashtag Instamoji on Instagram, you'll see the majority of those images are from South Korea and other East Asian countries. Japan. I think also some Chinese people who are using platforms like Instagram in other countries as well. You can tell it because they use the Instamoji, the emoji flags on their profile with an arrow to where they are now, the UK or something. Yeah. But yeah, I would say that, yes, we are most certainly not the main adopters of this sort of technology. And it very much does have a pedigree in communication forms in countries like Japan. Yeah. Which also, have that gendered history as well.
Actually, just carrying on from that, have you noticed any culturally specific practices in terms of how emoji has been juxtaposed with often the subtext of the hashtag? So when you pair those two together and the use of that, have you noticed any interesting unique practice?
find it difficult to make sense of sometimes because, well, first off, I need to translate the hashtags themselves that are being used in addition to Instamoji. It's kind of difficult to tell exactly what the explicit context is, in the same way that some of these like titles up the top are difficult to make sense of. Yeah, it's really difficult to make sense of without the explicit context also being stated, because that's the way that they work. Is that there aren't definitive meanings for any of these. No, there's no punctuation. I mean, like the number of times where I'll see two or three emojis used to mean one word or one short phrase, and then like the next emoji is the whole next sentence, and all this sort of thing. I think if you go back to the emoji dick example, you could like call me Ishmael, 3 words, 5 emojis.
That's why the old school what's that game called? Is really useful.
Oh, charades. Yeah. Yeah, well, if we had more time, we could play an emoji
charades.
version of charades. Maybe that's something for when the cognac comes out.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you've ever thought about trying to make some connections with the old clip art. It used to be in sort of the process.
Yeah.
Really badly designed series of images that were, here was a little collection of things that you could just throw into
A Word doc, yeah.
Yeah, and it was a very distinctive kind of design. It was its own kind of origins, but there's some kind of overlap here in the way in which that kind of banal use of very specific kinds of images.
Yeah.
Ends up kind of out of it.
That hadn't occurred to me, but I think it's a really interesting point. And now I'm going to go back and look at those ones. The only one I can really remember is Clippy, the assistant that would pop up and remind you to write "To whom it may concern" or something.
I was going to ask you that quote about we're moving away from the individual as artist into collective, blah blah blah. It's kind of not a linear trajectory like that, because like Renaissance of people painting and actually, like, as art moves through different periods and political systems, they'd get artists to amend Renaissance paintings to make them more suitable for that time. So even Renaissance painting has this kind of layered collage kind of thing where they recontextualize and rewrite.
Well, if we're talking about authorship as well, I'd come back to that point about there being very malleable meanings to these things, and that personal context is king when it comes to emoji. Like a peach emoji to a novice would be, a very innocent piece of fruit. But I think to anyone who's been using emoji for a bit longer, it's very clearly a butt. So, and that's just like one little pocket, and you can create your own language out of it as well. Yeah.
Cool. One more
Thank
question.
you for indulging me.
Moving on. Cool. Okay. Thanks,
Cool.
Patrick.
Thanks for letting me be stupid for a while.
So next up, we've got Thorn Nang, and he's come over from Auckland from the Animation College. Is that right?
That's the one.
And he'd like to say a few words about himself and his own practice, so I'll let you do that.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Thor. Quite clearly, blonde Scandinavian. So I'm from Animation College, and my background is in illustration and concept art for film and television. I'm just going to find it. Yeah. Right. And today I'm presenting a project called the Edda Museum. It's curating transmedia artifacts from classical literature. By transmedia, I'm talking about the sort of transmedia storytelling that Henry Jenkins points out with The Matrix, where the animations and the comics and the games that surround the films provide not just a supplementary story, but is a vital part of understanding the film's storyline, which results in something that he claims to be a narrative experience that can't be contained in one medium. And also looked at transmedia being used as part of ARG experiences. So in this case, this is 42 Entertainment marketing for the Dark Knight movie. What's different with this is they're really asking for participation from the users, which includes going to a protest, looking up and solving clues, which really creates buzz for the release of the film. Susan Bonds, who's the CEO of 42 Entertainment, believes that it's not just for entertainment purposes that we're looking for participation, but also for our social initiatives. So what I'm proposing is a new model of narrative storytelling. And with this model, I'm taking the best of those two examples I just shown with some differences. The first one is that this is not just for entertainment, but for a social initiative. In this case, it's to promote reading or reading culture. The second thing is that this doesn't just provide supplementary information for a release of an event, but to create a persisting platform with a story that continues to be told. And this platform that I'm proposing is a museum website. Today I'll be talking about a small mobile-based ARG that fits in with the museum website. But first I want to show you I could give you a taste of what the museum looks like. First question is, why a museum? Alain de Botton believes that museum curation and displaying collections can actually be used to address social needs. So in my case, I'm trying to use the museum as a vehicle to really delve deep into stories and bring out wisdom or particular aspects of stories and make them accessible. So this is what the museum looks like. It looks just like any other modern museum website. It's got a map that shows all the different collections. We've got a long list of collections that separate out the relics in the museum. The one key difference is that the relics are all completely fictional from books. Accompanying each of the relics is a story. It's a metafictional story that's told as a serialized chunk. And what the overall story entails is a story about a bunch of time travelers who invade stories in order to collect the relics. And these are the very same relics that are in the museum. When I think about metafiction, I'm not talking about the type of metafiction that is contained within a book, but I'm trying to figure out metafiction that comes out of a book. Effectively trying to collapse our world with the world of fiction. I've got a small example of what museum curation would look like.
Since the discovery of Prince Hamlet's burial chamber in 1920, the extra skull found with the prince's body has entranced the modern world. Tucked away with the prince's grave goods, his buckler, rapier, dagger, bracelets, and a gilded link of bronze, lay a 23-centimeter long skull with the mandibles still intact. The owner of the extra skull has been the subject of a hot debate ever since. Who was the owner of the skull? What was its significance for the prince?
Cool. So for this instance, we're delving into trying to find a forensic reconstruction of the skull. In the next example, this is bringing fiction to life. So this is a function or control. Control, okay. Bringing a fictional song to life.
Don't wanna
wanna sleep. Don't wanna do. Just wanna go walking through the pastures of the sky.
Yep.
Don't wanna sleep.
So that was Holly Golightly singing from Breakfast at Tiffany's. And once again, to collapse even further between the our reality and the fictional reality, I have Carl Sagan talking about a relic as well.
Programmed by an artist long since dead. The sculpture called life has the shape of a very large soap bubble with swirls of colors like the birth of the spiral nebula. Programmed by an artist.
So, little known fact if you're a fan of Carl Sagan, he was a science advisor for the museum in the 60s. So this museum is live, so it's a fully functional website at the moment. There's so much more on it, which I won't go into, so that was just a taste for what I'm going to show, which is this mobile-based ARG, which feeds into the website. So for each of the relics, I really want the story context to drive how I'm going to portray that relic. So in the case of the Odyssey, which is what the ARG will be based on, I'm looking at how the journey could be turned to an experience to get into the story. So this is one of the relics as part of this. This is called Francis Hugo's Bestiary of the Mediterranean World. And each of these relate to the creatures that you would find as part of Odysseus' journey. This is his rather complex journey that's been mapped out in Google Maps. So taking that, I've just simplified it to the different locations that you would find these creatures, and overlaying that in a city, and trying to recreate that sort of journey experience, in this case in Auckland, but I imagine it being able to take into Melbourne, for example. So I'm using geocaching, so just in case you don't know what geocaching is, it's a pretty well-established treasure hunting experience that you can use through GPS systems. And what you find is a cache that you're able to put in anything you like. So I'm making use of this technology by creating 7 different caches, each of them relating to a different creature. So what you'll find in each of these caches is secret documents. And these secret documents will allude to as part of a story. And the story follows Ariana Page, who is attempting to track down Odysseus in order to solve a murder mystery of the 1400s. If this is a bit confusing, just keep the 1400s in your mind and things will become clear in a second. So a part of the secret documents is that they'll lead you to different artifacts that's been put on the website. So in this one, this is a recording of sirens. Okay. So on the website, there's also further clues. So once you actually find this recording, you'll be able to you'll be taken to a link to online databases. So now this is where it gets interesting, because you're asking the user to actually go to the actual source material. In this case, this is hosted on Gutenberg. Over there, you read the chapter and you find clues into finding the actual key lock. And this is on the website where you've got to enter in the password to unlock something further. In this case, this will unlock a different painting. And with the painting comes clues to the next location. So I can imagine someone who's dedicated to be able to figure this out within a weekend, or it might take longer. So this is just an overall map of how I think this experience is going to run. What's key here is that the museum itself, the website, is going to be central to this experience as you weave in and out of it. Some relics will ask for more participation than others. So in this case, when you get to the location, you'll be asked to take a photograph and upload it to the website. And what I'll do with that photograph is actually take that photograph and paint a picture later on based on that. So what happens with participation is that users who unlock these clues and find these caches will unlock the content for others in the future on the website. They can also gain attribution. So if they enter in a form, I will say that they've basically donated to the museum. So there's some sort of archival stamp on it. Sometimes they can affect the narrative, which can also lead to co-creation of the story. Christy Danner talks about tiers as a way of addressing different needs and preferences. In my case, I'm dealing with different tiers of people who have different affinities with literature. So there might be some people who like to just stay at home and participate on the website. There might be others who would actually like to go out and explore in the real world. At the highest level of participation, which would include a lot of close reading, but also reading the original text, you'll start finding that I've created links between the Odyssey and Hamlet. And here's where the 1400s comes in, is Hamlet is actually set in the 1400s. So the events of what Ariana Page was trying to do with the Odyssey is trying to solve a mystery in Hamlet. If you go further, you'll find that a lot of the fictional elements and the world building elements that I've created is going to be connected to all these stories. And you start figuring that out as you participate more with the website over time. So there are some strengths to this. By using transmedia and ARG experiences, I think I'm able to dive into a story in quite a bit of depth and make it accessible. With a bit of sense of humor as well, it kind of turns something that could be seen as rather dry and boring into something that's far more fun. There are challenges, definitely. The first thing is about legality. So copyright in particular. Easy solution to that is to work in public domain only, but that can quickly turn it into something like an English literature course, which I would not like it to be. I think there's benefits to think about local stories, and particularly if you're going to use ARGs and how you can relate that to local locations. There's a term that writers use called smoke and mirrors, which is basically a way to hide elements of the world building that they've yet to build. So I've got a few smoke and mirrors as part of the website. One's including this thing called Outbreak of Bookworm, which effectively hides a lot of the collections which I've yet to build. There's also this 404 error page, which warns you and says, please be aware, attempts to retrieve this page will include the risk of ancestral displacement, paradox encasement, or falling in love with the wrong person. My biggest challenge at the moment is that it's very time consuming. So I'm what they call a puppet master. So I'm creating all the games, I'm doing all the artwork, I'm writing all the stories, and I'm doing all the coding for the website as well. So on that note, I'd just like to leave it and open up to questions.
Thank you. That's really impressive.
Thank you.
Are there any questions?
Can we play this next year?
Well, you mean when I've got more relics? Perhaps, yeah.
This isn't really a question, or maybe it is, but I find it really interesting that in order to kind of make encourage reading and have people engage with this literature, that you're situating it really explicitly in like a museum and in history, and maybe even in like the dead or something. And I know you mentioned Dylan Botton's kind of idea of what did he call it? The therapeutic potential. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that choice to like situate it explicitly in the museum?
Yeah, this kind of grew out of my thinking of, what remnants we have from literature. What can we take from it and keep in my mind, A part of it also is the notion that when a creator creates a narrative story, a lot of the time, which is quite interesting, is half the things that you think are real are not, and half the things that you think aren't real are real. So they're a product of that context of when they created that work, and being able to weave in and out of it is quite interesting. And a museum allows for that, and a museum allows for different layers of it as well. So on one hand, you have this sort of prose story that comes along with the relics, which could very well be just for the pleasure of reading. Then you've got a second layer, which is the curator looking back. So in fact, what I have is a curator looking back at information that's fictionalized that I've actually made up.
So do you make those different layers explicit?
Yeah, it's not as explicit in the Hamlet one. I think that the subtlety there is something that's appropriate for the story. But I would be, in that case, I haven't made it that explicit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, close reading would reveal it pretty quickly. There is a part in the article where, out of nowhere, it just mentions an event that happened in the War of the Worlds. So maybe that's something that jumps out of it.
Cool. Thanks.
I've got one other comment. I just thought the juxtaposition of the kind of Mediterranean map on Auckland and being able to actually go on a journey was a real strength of the work. And my dad does geocaching, and I can imagine him taking kind of grandkids on a journey around Auckland and meeting the mythical monsters.
Cool.
So I thought that was a real strength of the project.
Thank you.
Actually, it's a really good point because it makes it potentially applicable to any location around the world. So if, for instance, this was a narrative which you were able to apply onto any map, but perhaps even adjust based on local stories or events happening there. So for instance, at least in New Zealand, we have quite a well-established integration with, as you say, the Taniwha and the indigenous history and customs. That could be a real strength, but also a way to perhaps introduce communities to the other war that's being produced as a result of multiculturalism, other traditions that maybe people are bringing into that community or which have been less exposed.
Well, here, getting somewhere, so you can make lots of money and you can employ someone now.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut it short, but we'll have time to talk later. Thank you so much for the presentation.
No worries. Thank you.
Can we move straight on to the emerging talent lab?
Yeah.
Which Craig Batty is going to chair.